if you're running a studio and at a time where DVD sales are disintegrating, Blu-ray sales are disintegrating, TV is changing like sand beneath your feet, and you don't know which way the wind's blowing, one of the easiest, safest things to do, like, all right, we're going to do live action remakes of Disney princess cartoons. We're going to do nothing but Marvel, DC, and Star Wars. We're going to do the big brands and nothing else because it's just too scary and too dangerous to take a risk. But there are exceptions. I mean, earlier I said, I don't want to see anybody ever adapt anything that I love ever again, but I'll contradict myself because I feel like Denis Villeneuve, in good faith, is at least trying to do the best that he can with Dune, with the 2 movies that he's making out of that first book. So all is not lost. It's just easy to get disappointed and frustrated when you see that all the air in the room is going toward something like Ready Player One, a Steven Spielberg movie that's just dining out on nothing but nostalgia and Easter eggs and trivia, but it doesn't have a pulse, it doesn't have well-written lines, it doesn't have emotion, it doesn't have style. It's just a bunch of stuff that you recognize. Here's a bunch of stuff you recognize. Buy a ticket. Don't ask questions, just consume.
Fuck Ernie Klein, that's the first thing, right? It's like, that's the problem, is when a guy like that cynically makes a book. And I'll be honest, I have a lot of really smart friends who were fans of that book and, took it. They were very happy to have this product that was filled with all this stuff, all these ciphers, every single character. And then they liked the movie too. And I neither read the book nor saw the movie because I can't do that. It's like battery acid in my ear. It's not for me. But it seemed like the most cynical thing imaginable. Like Klein just decided, oh, I know what to do.
Weaponized nostalgia.
Weaponized nostalgia. I'm going to use this as a fucking cudgel. Villeneuve, if only there were more of him. I mean, maybe there are. But to be honest, he's the only one in a character class. He's sort of the only sort of big boy serious director who's mucking around a genre right now. Even if I love Dune, everyone knows I'm the Dune guy, and I love the first movie. And when the second one comes out, I'm going to give them both. That's a complete deal. I'll give them both a 5-star review, and we're going to be able to eat out on that forever. I'm going to be so happy to have that. And so I'll have Dune from '84. I'll have 2 Villeneuve Dunes. They'll be great. We have all the books.
Not reading Jodorowsky doc.
Yeah, not reading them Brian Herbert and Kevin Anderson books. Those don't count.
I've read the first 4.
Yeah, I didn't. I didn't stick my toe. But it's like Villeneuve is exactly the guy you want playing around in. If they're going to give IP to somebody, you're going to give adaptations to somebody. He's this like the real deal filmmaker you want doing that. Look, I would have been happier if he made another thing like Sicario. If he did his own particularly weird.
Yeah, I love Sicario.
The Sicario is great. I mean, Arrival was great. I'm just saying, it's like when he does his own thing, he's got the juice. And when he adapts this thing, he's got some juice in there too. That's what's amazing.
I'll never forget his line at Comic-Con. I was in Hall H, and somebody asked him why would he make a movie or sequel to Blade Runner, a beloved, acknowledged classic. Like, why can't you just leave well enough alone? He said, well, I didn't want somebody else to fuck it up. Mm-hmm. And the movie underperformed, but I feel like, once again, you can tell with the best intentions in the world, he gave us the best Blade Runner that he could deliver as a filmmaker. I haven't revisited it once since I saw it in the theater, so perhaps it wasn't as successful as he would have liked or as I would have liked. But once again, he was the guy at that time to at least have the best shot at giving us a possible Blade Runner.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that the sin of that movie, or one of the sins, is stuck in the Jared Letoization of film, where all of a sudden that's what's going to make a serious movie, is the studio foisting this A-lister, Oscar-winning actor on a guy like that. He's got to find a way to build a movie around him, and clearly he's not ready for the job. I've
got a big topic I want to get to about one of the main drivers of bland global escapism, but for you, is there anything else that I'm overlooking at what's brought us to this moment, or is it just one of the situations where like a studio like Disney, which used to make lots of mid-range movies, suddenly they said, we're not going to make any mid-range movies anymore. We're only going to do tentpole movies, and we're going to, instead of doing maybe 20 movies a year, we're going to do maybe 8 or 9, and every single one of them is going to feel like a massive event. Like, is this the culture? Is just a natural byproduct of that switch, or that the new emphasis on a new kind of filmmaking, just blockbusters at the expense of everything else?
Yeah, the myth of perpetual. What is it? You call it the myth of perpetual gain?
Well, all your shareholders like to believe in the myth of perpetual growth, but it's not possible. No company gets bigger forever.
Even look, Disney at one point, they had Touchstone, which was their
I used to be a shareholder, but I'm no longer. All my Marvel shares got converted to Disney when Disney bought Marvel.
Yeah. I mean, at one point, like Touchstone, Disney did make movies for grown-ups. They even put rated R. They even put rated R movies out at a certain time.
They had brands within brands, so it wouldn't put a dent in the reputation of Mickey Mouse.
And every time I hear something, preposterous like how much money Fatal Attraction made on a budget where it was like $15 million prorated $87 and it made something like 150 or something.
No, it made almost 400.
Almost 400 million. That's
Yeah.
the thing. So you say that now, it's like, well, that's Mirabile Dictu. Look at the freaking yield on that. That's crazy. It's crazy that
That's real money.
It's real money.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, anybody in any time frame should look at that kind of growth and say and you make a movie like Fatal Attraction, that's what does it, right? Like, you get to move the needle, cast these actors in that moment, make a movie like that, and you
It's a movie
profit.
for adults that kids want to sneak into. So once again, 4 quadrant, everybody's going. Just you have to frown upon the kids like myself who had to sneak into the theater.
And the entire gross of that movie is that's the production budget of something that comes out of Mulan right now.
And when it comes to profitability, that's what gets lost in this conversation. Joker cost $50 million to make and it grossed over $1 billion. It was the most profitable superhero movie ever made. Forget Endgame, because they spent a lot on it and they spent a lot marketing it. Yeah. I feel like that's the real blockbuster. When you make a movie like Deadpool for 50 or 60 million and it grosses a couple $100 million. I wish Hollywood would chase those, because you can take a risk with an R-rated piece of genre entertainment, because you're only spending 50 or 60 million. If you lose everything, you're not going to close your door. So
at the same time, look, Joker I didn't care for. I don't think Todd Phillips is like the big time director. Deadpool I liked well enough, but one thing both of those movies had in common for me is that for all the things you just say, I thought they were really predictable what was going on in both of those films, where they were built to be the one movie that was that 50 million stretch drive to the end, and they had all the pieces, a very calculated, cynical, flow chart designed by people in Burbank to say, how can we make a movie that looks like it's got the rated R thing on it. It's got Ryan Reynolds, it's got pegging in the one scene in Deadpool. You get some risque things, some nudity, a lot of violence, but it's still perfectly CGI filled, looked like a superhero movie. It was still 4 quadrant. It's just that they decided we can take a risk a little bit. That was Fox obviously made this decision, not Disney.
Another trend that I loathe is when people say, well, we're going to make this movie PG-13, but we're going to take it all the way to the edge. It's going to be the most hardcore PG-13 you've ever seen, like with Venom. That was the debate for years. Well, we might make it R, but we're not going to make it a really hardcore PG-13. I'm sorry. A hardcore PG-13 is like saying, this is the most hardcore brand of O'Doul's we've ever served. It's non-alcoholic beer, but it's non-alcoholic beer for like people who like to party. It's like, well, then it's not beer. I'm sorry. It's what the hell are we talking about? I hate
grape
that
juice
trend.
and wine, you idiot.
Yeah, but now people are talking about that with Deadpool. Oh, Disney's going to make a hardcore PG-13 Deadpool. I'm like, please die. I have no interest in a PG-13 Deadpool.
No, I think that I felt cynical about those 2 movies. I think they were cynical about making them. And I could say the thing about Joker, which was a real lob shot, was that they built half a movie around Joaquin Phoenix. Joaquin Phoenix was the guy who essentially furnished an arc, furnished cinematography, furnished filmmaking.
Oh, without him, there's nothing there. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that Hollywood's doing a good enough job of driving its own frozen pizza. They're taking the wrong lessons from these things. They're chasing perpetual growth, which is a myth. I've said this before. Disney's treating movies like apps. They're treating movies like iPhones. It's like Disney needs to make tech company money. Movies don't behave the same way video games and iPhones do. They just don't. And so Disney's kind of like perverting the filmed art form to get to the same place that a thing like Google is at. And it's like Disney and Google should never be competing in the same space, and yet there they are.
But maybe it would be helpful if we even define what we mean when we criticize a movie as tasting like frozen pizza, because I've eaten Tombstone pizza. It's fucking delicious. But it's not as good as Arturo's, like, at Houston and Thompson and that sort of thing. But maybe you and I should both come up with some examples of what we mean by frozen pizza. And for me, frozen pizza is when you take something like RoboCop from the 80s and then you do a PG-13 remake. Or you take Total Recall from 1990 and you do a PG-13 remake where the sex is gone, where the hardcore violence is gone, any sort of provocative language is gone, and suddenly what you're left with is something fun for the whole family. But like I said, let the adults pick the movie and let the kids go along for the ride if they're cool. Like I saw Conan the Barbarian when I was 5. Conan the Barbarian is not frozen pizza. But can you think of an example in the last 5, 6, 7 years where like, oh, like that movie had all the potential in the world, but what we're left with is a movie without any rough edges, without anything that'll offend anybody, without anything that'll excite anybody. What are like the main, I guess who are the guilty parties when it comes to frozen pizza?
How about this? I think it's more important to, you talk about defining frozen pizza. It's as much the culprits as it is the environment that's going to go into doing it. Because, you know, again, we've said this, when you make a movie for everybody, you're essentially making a movie for nobody. That person doesn't exist. It's a blob, you know, it's a shmoo, the shape that just takes whatever form you want to. Mr. Potato Head with the holes, none of the things put into it, right? That kind of thing. That's what's ridiculous about it. But it's like, you know, the biggest offense to me in all of this is thinking about you have to flatten every feature of the art to do this. So it's not just making toothless decisions, because look, I've watched real mild movies that still have something interesting about them. And I think what's horrifying is it's not just the decisions to make a weak movie that has some feature that's interesting. It's almost like by design, you're de-interesting everything in a movie, right?
I like that, de-interesting.
Yeah, and here, like, well, you think of all the things we just take for granted when you watch a great movie. You are flattening every feature of film. You're flattening the writing. You're flattening the direction. You're flattening the camera movements. You're flattening the color space, the cinematography, the way the lens moves. You're flattening everything, location shots. I mean, it's like just fucking hammer it as flat as shit. And that's what you need to do. Get rid of any protrusions or protuberances or projections and make something absolutely level.
And we're complicit because there are audience members who want that experience. Oh. They want to be able to put on Disney Plus for their kids and walk out of the room knowing nothing that they see at any point will upset them, excite them, stimulate them, get them going. They want to walk in like they are good to go for 9 hours watching something that's dripping with nostalgia or capitalizing on the past, but nothing is, they're not going to hear Zendaya in Euphoria talking about how fentanyl is the best drug ever. It's like, wow, how did Warner Brothers let that get into the show? But she has like a lengthy spiel about how fentanyl is awesome.
Two examples I thought of really quickly in terms of something that worked in the same space, in the comedy space. Now, I'm not saying these are the greatest movies, I'm not saying these are the worst movies. However, look at the stylistic differences. In a movie like Swingers, I don't know how people feel about it, but the thing is, Swingers was made by a real director, Doug Liman. It was real cinema. It actually moved, it behaved as a film.
Yes, the tail end of the 90s indie craze.
Yeah, but the thing is, it was written by a guy, that was like his first film, Favreau's first script, and Lyman was a great director, and that was like, I think, one of Lyman's first movies, if not his actual first movie. But Swingers behaves as a film. You know, it's got jagged edges, it's got protuberances, it sounds interesting, it looks interesting, it behaves interesting, it moves, there's something to watch. And I love this movie, but look at 40-Year-Old Virgin. 40-Year-Old Virgin barely behaves as a film. It's a script. It's linorama, right? Judd Apatow is not a film director. Judd Apatow was
especially today.
Especially today.
But he was funny as hell back in the day.
And I loved it. Look, 40-Year-Old Virgin's a great, funny. I saw it like I've seen 100 times. The thing is, as a film, it's not a film. There's no cinematography. It's no writing. It's just lines. It's an if you want that, go to ASCAT at UCB. And I have. I like that. I enjoy people running out of the middle of Anchorman and saying, "What does Sex Panther smell like?" It smells like the prosthetic leg filled with Indian food, right? Those are great hits. And it's like, that's not a movie. That is just linorama. That's watching a sitcom. That's watching somebody just riff at a bar and just try to cut their friends up. You know, and it's like what a comedy sounds like today in terms of what the audience expects it to be is a 3-hour-long Adam Sandler sad fest that Judd Apatow directs.
You get Dave Bautista, pair him with a kid, and it's a very innocent, heartwarming fable. But it's like, no, that's not a comedy. A comedy is Jackass Forever, where you laugh so hard you will take a dump in your pants and fall out of your chair. That is a comedy. And yeah, but when it comes to comedy, no genre has started to taste more like frozen pizza in the last 10 years than the comedy genre. Big budget comedies do not exist
Comedies
anymore.
aren't comedy. They're action films with punched-in jokes.